And we're back live here at the Oliver Wyman Health Innovation Summit. Hi everyone, my name is Kate Warnock, coming to you from the GuideWell Insights Lounge with our next guest, Mr. Crispin Ellison. Crispin, welcome.
Welcome, lovely to be here. I've flown over from London.
We're so happy to have you, and I know that you're here just a day after arriving, so God love you for managing the jet lag, but as you said, you're used to it, aren't you?
Yeah, I do a little bit of air travel. Yeah.
Just a wee bit. All right, well, Crispin, your role with Oliver Wyman is you are a partner for the health and life sciences practices. So, all right, so let's start with your first question. I know that at this year's World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos, you moderated a panel on all things sugar, obesity, and diabetes. What are the challenges to change?
Yeah, I mean, we had this panel at Davos, which was well attended by some government leaders, quite a lot of food industry leaders, which was good to see, and also healthcare and some NGOs and other action groups.
And some celebrities sprinkled in there too.
Yeah, we had the White House chef, Sam Cass, who he just left being the White House chef, and he had been Michelle Obama's director looking at this problem in the US. And he was the star of the show, mainly because he came up with this great comment, because everyone was saying we need to eat, more fiber and all of that. And he said the trouble is, you look at the advertising for sugar, for chocolate, for sweets and all of that, and it's all sexy, it's all glamorous. And the advertising for fiber is all do good. And he said, sex beats fiber every time. And that was the most highly tweeted comment in Davos that day. So that was a big success.
In your panel,
it was a big success.
Excellent.
Absolutely, yeah.
Love it.
But I mean, broadly, what we were looking at is, there's two sort of sets of. It's a difficult challenge. We've got 415 million people in the world with diabetes at the moment. Looks to increase by 50 to 65% by 2030, that number. And one of the really interesting things that came out was the financial implications of long-term disease, because the World Economic Forum had done a piece of work to look at the cost of long-term disease globally. And their analysis was that it was, by 2030, long-term disease would cost us 5 times what the economic crash of 2008 cost the world.
Oh my goodness.
Which I thought was a really interesting...
Pretty arresting, isn't it?
Yeah. And sugar, diabetes, obesity is a very significant chunk of that long-term disease crisis. So, broadly, you've got to either change customer behaviors, and of course today we've been talking about the difficulty of actually changing the customer behavior, how subtle you have to be, and or you have to change the behavior of the producers and retailers. And you've got those sort of two audiences to really look at. And you've got sticks and carrots to sort of achieve that. It's not in the interests of the retailers and producers to kill the fatted calf of sugar, which is significantly important to their businesses. So there is something around sticks and carrots, and we really sort of 3 levers that we sort of focused on: education, which is very much aimed at the individual customer, the citizen. And then the stick, which is really tax and regulation. Mm-hmm. Regulation, I think what we were talking about mainly is sort of advertising. Advertising for children eating lots and lots of chocolates. Different countries, I think, have a very different view on this. Norway's got a complete ban, on advertising inappropriate foods for children, before such and such a time at night. I think in this great country, putting restrictions on advertising are rather more difficult.
I believe so, yes.
But you've got things like that. Then you've got things like stopping the offers. And again, there's this whole, it's this whole thing of sort of Big Brother interfering versus freedom to make your own choices. But let's stop giving 2-to-1 offers for a bottle of Coca-Cola. Let's stop piling chocolates up by the checkout in your retail stores. And again, some countries have started to make progress there, but the political climate in different countries is very different, I think, around that. Sam Cass, the White House, he was very much looking at education rather than the sticks, and focused on trying to educate people to and to engage them into really understanding around this. I think everyone found that interesting, but it's a very long-term approach. And if you've got advertising campaigns working against you, is it enough on its own?
Right.
And then we had a long talk on the vexed subject of sugar tax, which is something that I know quite a bit about, having worked with the British government, who are introducing a sugar tax at the moment. Without wishing to sort of go into detail, I mean, broadly, if you want to tax something to stop people doing it, the evidence is you probably have to tax it at about 50% or more. And there's no way that people are going to go for a sugar tax of 50% in any normal country. Mexico's recently introduced a sugar tax, and it created a dip for about 18 months, but it very quickly recovered. It was about a 10% tax, 15% tax. But I'm not sure, again, that the Mexican tax system is things that necessarily people would wish to emulate worldwide. And so what we've done in the UK is, rather than tax at the point of sale, tax the consumer, we're actually putting a levy on the producer. And we're saying to the producer, if you have more than 8% sugar in your drink, then you will pay a tax at this rate. And if it's 5%, you'll pay it at that rate. Now, so we're trying to encourage the producers to reformulate using less sugar. They, of course, have the choice of ignoring that and passing the cost on to the customer. But I think it's an interesting one, and we'll see how effective it is. Canada are looking at the same problem at the moment and are looking at those two options. Prime Minister Trudeau is very keen to actually sort of address this. But I mean, I think that's a sort of summary of what we did at Davos. Yeah.
It must have been just a fascinating conversation, because again, there are so many different players involved, and when you talk about education, how early is too young to start, and how do you, is it better to educate the parents of the young children, or do you start with the young child and trying to influence what they consider worthy of putting in their mouths? I mean, it's such a fascinating conversation you must have led.
I think it is, and an ongoing one. But I think the whole business of, if you wanted to, and there are other events going on here, I sort of a very interesting discussion before lunch, but looking at how you influence long-term disease, and it's certainly not through healthcare. Healthcare is what picks up the pieces, sometimes well, sometimes fairly inadequately. But actually, if you want to address this, and it's, people will argue, but about 70% of the cost of healthcare is in long-term diseases, is behaviourally driven, then we need to be looking at using education, we need to be looking at social care, we need to be looking at the economics of communities and societies, because contrary to what a lot of people think, sugar consumption is much highest amongst the poorer and more deprived communities in our society, and in the poorer countries in the world. They have the highest growing obesity problem. It's in the poorer countries, and it's a much bigger problem now than undernutrition globally. So, I mean, we will see where we go. I think it's a big challenge.
Well, certainly a topic worth exploring at a venue like Davos, where you have such global participation. Crispin, in our final moments, I was wondering, you've talked about maybe, exploring taxing the producers or introducing education. Is there anything else that governments and health services can do to really help influence the way people behave and ultimately, hopefully, have healthier outcomes?
I think there's something about governments taking this seriously. A lot of this is about leadership, and I think it's interesting the way that Trudeau is taking a lead on this in Canada. But a lot of it is about leadership, and indeed Michelle Obama in the States, although I think the program has had less traction here. I think a lot of it is about leadership, and I think a lot of what events like this can do is pull together some of the evidence to persuade governments it's a real issue, because I don't think any government in the Western world would think it at all surprising if you said one of your key priorities is not to have another financial crisis. And yet, I say, the World Economic Forum numbers, not ours, but their numbers, are that this potentially, long-term diseases will cost 5 times as much by 2030. So getting on top, getting on top in terms of prevention and actually trying to tackle the behaviours that cause it. Right. There's a huge win out there and a huge amount of pain if we don't do it properly.
Well, Crispin, thank you for bringing to light such a very global topic, something that impacts all of us, financially or just population health really writ large. So appreciate you spending your time and your insights with us here at the Guidal Insights Lounge. My name is Kate Warnock. Keep watching. We're going to be up with another interview in just a moment.